Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Gaming Silicon video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with comments from Phil Spencer on the next generation Xbox, specifically regarding the CPU performance. His comments indicate that Microsoft are going to be increasing CPU performance of the next generation Xbox drastically. He said that the current Xbox and PlayStation systems have a deficit in the CPU and are much more balanced towards GPU. So we're going to be discussing that in just a moment. Then we're going to move over to AMD and the server market. According to Intel themselves, AMD have a good chance of capturing up to 20% of the server market, thus $4 billion in revenue per year. And then we're going to finish off with a piece of Intel news which is not so great. There has been yet another vulnerability discovered in Intel processors, and it does not, at least according to the research done so far, impact AMD CPUs. But with that said, let's start things out with Microsoft. Phil Spencer said in a Giant Bomb live stream, "We're pretty open about some of this stuff. If you watch what we're doing now with the Xbox One consoles, we've introduced variable refresh rate, we've added high capacity frame rate, and I think frame rate is an area where consoles can just do more in general. When you look at the balance between CPU and GPUs in today's consoles, it's a little out of whack relative to what's on the PC side. So unquestionably, even if you were to take a look at the Xbox One X, one of the flaws of the system is actually the AMD Jaguar processors. Microsoft did make certain changes to the Jaguar CPU, especially compared to the Xbox One. It increased the clock speed from 1.75 GHz to 2.3 GHz. It had made some changes on the GPU itself to bake in DirectX 12 commands to lower the overhead on the CPU, and a few other bits and pieces. But overall, the AMD Jaguar CPUs are definitely the weak point of the system. For those unfamiliar, Microsoft have 8 CPU cores like the PlayStation 4 systems in the Xbox One. The difference is, of course, clock speed varies between generation. The base model PS4 has 1.6 GHz, the Xbox One base model has 1.75 GHz, the Xbox One X runs at 2.3 GHz, and the PS4 Pro runs at 2.1 GHz. But there is also CPU overhead for the operating system. Microsoft allocates about 1.5 CPU cores. We actually learned about that from an SDK leak, which I did go at length into just recently. Microsoft do allocate about 1.5 CPU cores to system overhead. Now this of course means the system operating functions, which would be the dashboard and when you're recording video clips and doing whatever else, the system actually allocates a percentage of CPU time. So with the Xbox One X, we can presume that those allocations are very similar. I say about 1.5 because it is actually semi-flexible. It does depend on what the system is doing at the time. It can be that developers have up to 80% of the CPU available or considerably less. I have done a full analysis of this in the Xbox One SDK leak, which I'll try to remember to link in the video description. But suffice to say, that is for the Xbox One generation of systems. And it's fair to say that from Phil's comments, things are going to change for the next generation. Ultimately, from what we're learning, there's a very good chance that we're going to still see Microsoft stick, much like Sony are with AMD. Realistically, therefore, we're left with a couple of possibilities for the CPU architecture. Assuming the leaks concerning the Xbox One successor arriving in 2020. By the way, supposedly it's going to be a family. I've discussed that at length as well. I'll try to remember to link that in the video description. And the family name is Scarlett. Anyway, from what we can understand, given the release date, most likely Microsoft are going to have a couple of CPU options available. The first would be Zen Plus or possibly even Zen 2. Now, according to other leaks, the PlayStation 5 is going to be utilizing Navi and is going to be using the Zen Plus architecture, but is going to be doing so on a 7nm. It is possible, according to leaks, rumors and speculation, that the next generation Xbox is going to arrive after the PlayStation 5. If it does, that could be good news in terms of performance, and Microsoft actually may be doing so deliberately. For two reasons. One, the Xbox One X is not that old. I mean, even at 2020, it's only going to be about 3 years old by the time they release a new system. It may give Microsoft the knowledge and confidence that yields of a 7nm Zen 2 are going to be high enough for them to include it in their next generation of systems. What about potential layout? Well, I am doing a full analysis of the next generation consoles, at least according to the rumors we know thus far. But they have an awful lot of options. They could have 4 physical cores with 8 threads, or they could have 8 physical cores, or they could have a mixture of both. My guess is that 4 physical cores with 8 threads would probably be okay. After all, in terms of mapping current CPU threads with backwards compatibility to the next generation of devices, it would be pretty simple. And honestly, it would be quite a lot of throughput, particularly if they clocked the CPU at a reasonable speed of around, let's say 3.2 to 3.7 gigahertz. Of course, a lot of this does depend on the next generation architectures. And much more besides, we're not too familiar yet with what AMD will be able to crank out with Zen 7nm. All we can guess is with the Zen Plus architecture, which is on of course 12nm. And certainly Zen can quite happily hit 3 to 3.4 gigahertz with quite low power draw in those instances, so it'll be interesting to see what Microsoft will do. From what we know about Navi 10, it's going to have at least 1080 type levels of performance, although I'm going to cover this much more in depth in a different video which is going to be uploaded today, so do go ahead and check that out if you're more interested in that type of information. So Microsoft have an awful lot of options to put out a system which is considerably more powerful than the current generation and possibly at a fairly good price point. In the server market, Intel have been a dominant force. Back in the day, AMD were very competitive with Optron, but in the last several years, it's just not been the case. Intel have 99%, or have had 99% of the server market, which is just absolutely dominant. It's decimating their competition. But things may change. According to Intel's Brian Knight in an interview, the analyst firm Nomura Instinet actually had an interview with Brian Knight, who is of course Intel's CEO. And according to the analyst firm, well, Intel definitely have something to worry about. According to Intel themselves, they have one job right now, and that is to stave off AMD in the server market. Intel appear to be worried that AMD could be poised to take 15 to 20% of the data market share. That would of course be for HPC, for servers and so on, and that is incredibly lucrative. In just one quarter, Intel made over $5 billion US. So think about it this way, in a year, AMD could make $4 billion US just by capturing 15 to 20% of the market. That is insane revenue. And for AMD, of course, that would be a massive cash injection. When it comes to AMD right now, they have a very aggressive roadmap. Sure, I'm not saying that Intel is sitting on their hands or anything, but Intel do have a lot of competition. AMD are skipping Zen Plus or 12nm Zen for the data center. Instead, they're going to be moving straight to 7nm. And according to both Tom's Hardware as well as the website Serve the Home, AMD are basically confirmed at this point to be releasing a 48-core EPYC CPU and then a 64-core EPYC CPU. And this is, by the way, a single socket processor. This is not dual socket or anything like that. Think of that, 128 threads from one CPU core. Imagine just 2 of those in configuration. That is an insane amount of threads. 256 threads just for dual sockets. That is massive, and is definitely something that Intel need to take into a lot of serious consideration over the next several years. Of course, Intel still have the advantage, so it's for Intel to actually lose this advantage and AMD to gain it. It's going to be fascinating to see how AMD managed to wrangle some of the market share away from Intel. Don't forget, AMD have stated that you will be able to plop the 7nm EPYC processors into the current generation motherboards, and they said that their customers, quote, love that, and you can't blame them. It's an incredible flexible upgrade path for servers and data center owners. With that said, let me know your thoughts on this one. Especially if you're a server administrator or you work in a data center or in that kind of industry, do you know anyone right now who's considering purchasing AMD over Intel? If so, what would be the quantities? Give me your thoughts and opinions. Okay, so there's bad news for Camp Intel, and no, I don't actually mean the EPYC server threat either. There is another CPU vulnerability that has been discovered in Intel processors, and this, by the way, has actually been confirmed by Intel themselves, however, has been discovered and has been researched by numerous other companies. The threat is known as lazy FP state restore, or the vulnerability is known as CVE 2018-3665 and is within both Intel Core and Xeon processors. And as the name would imply, is actually because of the leveraging of the performance optimization feature known as lazy FP restore. There is some bad news and there's some good news. The bad news is that any processors from Sandy Bridge onwards are affected by this issue. The good news is, however, that unlike Spectre and Meltdown, the latest vulnerability does not actually reside within hardware itself, and operates very similarly to that of Spectre variant 3A. Now, as I mentioned, AMD processors are not affected by this issue. Red Hat is already working on patches. The other good news is that certain versions of Windows, including Server 2016, OpenBSD, and Dragonfly BSD, are not affected by these issues. My best advice to you, if you are running an operating system which is impacted, be sure to download the latest security patches the moment they are available. If, however, you are running an operating system which is not affected, then you just don't need to worry too much. Is this a major big deal? No, because at the end of the day, this does not require a microcode update, which is certainly good news for Intel. The bad news is, while this is not necessarily a major security vulnerability in the way that, let's say, Spectre was, or Meltdown in terms of the threat level, because now so many operating system vendors are so used to this and they can basically put the code out pretty quickly. The issue is, it's not good for public relations. This is the type of thing which really hammers public relations, particularly once again, given AMD are unaffected by this. Well, hopefully we won't see too many more of these issues. And while Intel have certainly had their share of security vulnerabilities, it's not like AMD are scot-free. After all, we've learned about this secure processor that was in AMD's hardware, and it also has some issues, shall we say, that security researchers have been currently running scenarios on. So unfortunately, no matter whether you're looking at AMD hardware or Intel hardware, things need to be patched eventually. So yeah, it's just poor timing for Intel, given obviously they are really worried at the moment about the server market. With all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment, subscribe, and definitely ring the bell icon if you so desire. Hopefully you've been enjoying the content, and it's been really good to have so many new subscribers on. It's really nice to see the comment section so active as well. So I just wanted to say thanks very much for the support, everyone. It's been greatly appreciated. But for now, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Bye.